that's one of the most glorious things about the gospel is that you're going to see the flaws in this stuff. You're going to see the flaws in yourself. You're going to see the flaws in others. But this is all redeemable if you take the time to find what's redeemable about it. And that to me is one of like the just massively wonderful journeys it's opened up just by saying yes to this gospel, even though I didn't understand it at the time.
Hi, everyone. This is Dana Black.
And this is Chelsea Simon.
Welcome to the Collective Table.
Hi, everyone. It's Chelsea here. I am finding myself at a loss for words. In today's episode, I got the immense privilege of chatting with one of my high school heroes, Jennifer Knapp. Jennifer is a Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter, author, speaker, and advocate. Her impressive history includes selling over 1 million albums with her first 3 releases, Kansas, Lay It Down, and The Way I Am. I know every single word to every single song on these albums. Despite a considerable fan base and critical and commercial success, she walked away from music in 2002 at the height of her career. After a 7-year hiatus, she returned in 2010 with a renewed passion for music, showcased in her album, Letting Go. As the first major artist in the Christian music world to speak openly about LGBTQ identity, her unique position created opportunities for national dialogue. In 2012, Jennifer founded the nonprofit organization Inside Out Faith, through which she continues to speak and perform nationally as an advocate for LGBTQ and faith issues. As a young person, Jennifer's music opened my heart, expanded my worldview, shaped my theology, and spoke truth in my life. They say don't meet your heroes, but I have to say, I love Jennifer more now than ever. She is laid back, honest, patient, deeply thoughtful, funny, humble, and just all around wonderful. Also, a side note, Dana was not able to join me for this conversation. As many of you know, Dana is a wife, mother, co-creator of the Collective Table, and a seminary student. With all of life's demands, she had to put up and hold to some boundaries. It was a good lesson for her, and I think for all of us, that it's okay, even necessary, to say no. But I know Dana is just as excited and honored as I am to lift up this conversation with Jennifer Knapp. We hope you enjoy. Jennifer, you have no idea what a thrill. You have no idea. I feel like, this is like celebrity, like starstruckness, but I have to tell you that we've actually met before.
I hope it was good. That's always my fear when somebody says that. I'm like, oh God, what did I do? What's the story coming next?
Okay, so I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania originally, and my best friend, who's a super fan also, she's like, I can't believe you get to talk to Jennifer. We went to your concert and we went to go have like a CD signing after. And I just remember you told me you liked my jacket, and I felt like the coolest person in the world. Like literally, I still have the jacket. I'm like, this is cool. Like, I felt like so like a dorky high school kid. I felt like the coolest kid ever.
Oh my
gosh. It was lovely.
Isn't it funny what things like that mean to us? And I'm like, if somebody said that to me, I'd probably be the same way anyway, because like I have no, like I'm kind of, I'm listening to that story and I'm like, oh wow. Like I'm not really known for my fashion sense. I mean, you see me, I'm in like a daggy t-shirt right now. I look awful. But like, I'm so glad, like, you know, but I love jackets. Like that's one of my things, but I don't wear them very often. It's weird. I like jackets and hats, and then I never wear any. I'm just in shorts and a t-shirt right now. It's so sad.
Well, you were my fashion guru. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well,
you were my fashion guru then. I still have the jacket. So why don't we just jump in and tell me a little bit about your background? You know, where has faith played a role as you were growing up, especially in like your like childhood to teenage years? Let's start with like that.
Yeah. So one of the things I almost always lead with, because it still annoys me to this day, is the fact on Wikipedia, it says that I was raised in an irreligious household. And, you know, I think that's a bit nutty because, I mean, I grew up in Kansas. So there's this big cultural thing of growing up in the Midwest where kind of everybody believes in God, believes in God, and in general, everybody kind of goes to church, or at least is familiar with church, right? And so, we went to church on a relatively regular basis, although my dad wasn't that into it. I was a baptized kid. My grandmother, goes to church every Sunday and forces me into pantyhose now and again. I mean, so I was familiar with church. I think the thing that it's interesting to me when people think about like growing up in the church, it's a kind of, to me at least, a very evangelical term, because it wasn't until I went to college and started making adult decisions about my faith that I started to participate more fully in that. And then I got, I got saved. Right. In it always has air quotes around it. Because I mean, I think it's I've evolved in the way that I think about that decision in my life over the last 20 years. It was something I did as a young adult, and it was a very purposed turning toward an engagement of my faith and spiritual community and biblical learning, and really, all the things, not just being a Christian, but all the things kind of underneath that umbrella. So I made that decision in college. And I quickly found out that there was a difference in all these things that I was talking about. I would have said, I believed in God and I was a Christian. And then, this decision and getting involved with the evangelical day in, day out, committing your life to Jesus, which seemed really weird to me at the time, but I was really curious and I was really in. I found myself strangely straddling these two worlds. So, this and almost an inferiority complex of the faith that I'd grown up with and the people that I'd been in and around, as if somehow they weren't quote unquote real Christians. I was constantly being encouraged to, did you get your mother to commit to Christ? Have you talked to your grandmother? I'm like, my grandmother's been going to church, like at the same church for 1,000 years. Like, I am not going to go into her world and tell her that she doesn't know God the right way, like it. So like, yeah. And immediately I think, kind of really early into that experience, within a year or so of taking my discipleship seriously and taking my spiritual growth seriously, all of a sudden I found myself kind of pitted between not only just two worlds that I saw around me, but the two worlds within myself, right? The one that was a deeply spiritual person and deeply meaningful, but very much grounded in reality. Like, what is practical about a day in, day out life of, and the parts that were weird, like Jesus is my best friend type of conversation. And I was like, I don't know that I can talk that way or that I want to talk that way. And how did that pit itself against a deep-seated, heartfelt enthusiasm and need and longing for this new life I wanted, this new vision of a world I wanted to cultivate? So all of those things, like I put that all into this big basket of going, wow, it's really interesting. So like kind of the first couple of years that I got into that, I already understood this conflict between a spiritual life and the world that we're grounded in, taking it seriously without taking it too seriously, being spiritual but not religious, even though that wasn't the language at the time. But, I kind of had to figure out how I even balanced myself, how I balanced my relationships, and all those things in the short version of that, as I started to kind of pour that into the music that I was writing, the conflicts that I had with what I wouldn't have said at the time, but there were theological conflicts, things that I didn't agree with what I was being taught. I didn't just swallow the pill.
And it's funny because like at such a young age, that's such a mature perspective to say like there's some dissonance here, like cognitive dissonance here that doesn't really quite sit right. Because when you're talking, I'm reminded like it's almost like religious bullying. Like you have to fit in these parameters. It's black and white. If you go outside, if you start questioning, if you push back, you're doing it wrong. And so it's like, that was my experience growing up in like kind of the evangelical footstep that just doesn't allow for that freedom or flexibility, I guess.
Well, I love that you say that cognitive dissonance, but within that dissonance for me, I think early on, like there was, it's easier sometimes to see this thing playing out with others than within ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let me give you an example of that is that, for example, like this idea that I would go back and evangelize to, my parents in some particular way as if, they needed to be saved and there was something wrong with them. Mm. And I was like, the blessing of that, ironically, is that I had to go, the Christian that I was becoming and the thing that I wanted to do with my spiritual life, I still had to go home and live.
Yeah.
So, I had to be not like in some, you have to be like in some kind of disciplinary way, but I loved my parents. I loved my family. I'm seeing the world in a profoundly different way than they'd experienced or been able to travel with me. Right. I'd code switched essentially, right. Almost overnight. And that didn't make sense to a lot of people. And I had to go home and live with the people that I loved and still love them at the same time. And I didn't want to be in conflict with them. I wanted, strangely enough, this newfound faith really made me want to double down on the experiences. Like I saw my mom in a whole new way. I wanted to love my mother. I didn't want to just be in conflict with my mom. And I wanted to figure out how to do that no matter where she was on the planet. And so the irony about all that is that I saw the blessing of my family and the accountability of my family in a way that isn't always couched in especially in the evangelical thing. All of a sudden, the new authorities in my life were supposed to be church people, only church people. And anyone else outside of that had no authority, had no accountability, and had no relevance to the community I wanted to build in the world. And I think immediately that thing kind of just struck me as just, and this is maybe my Midwestern kind of rural experience. Like family's family.
Yeah.
We're all hot messes. I got uncles that are doing weird shit and I do weird stuff. And I'm a rock and roll star. My family thinks I've lost my mind. But we all have to figure out how to get, I grew up with horses. I've got horsey people and educated people. There's just a cocktail of all these people that you've got to figure out how to love. And I think my family taught me that, and I wasn't ready to abandon it. And I think that cognitive dissonance sometimes that our faith community say, everything outside of this bubble of what we are learning in spirituality should be in conflict with us, rather than the way that I think, now it's 20 some odd years later, I realize this kind of this theology that's developed in me with trying to go what in our whole world that's before us, people who are in faith, out of faith, people who are related to us or not related to us, what is my role in integrating that and seeing the way that God sees that? How is the way that does God just trash the things that are, I don't think that anything's out of God's purview, like it's all seen and it's all loved and created by God. And I know that sounds really strange when you put it right up next to some of the things that we teach. And so I just, I think early on, as I tried to deal with that largely alone, because you didn't talk about those conflicts in my church at the time, I just kind of put them in the subtext, all the things that I was writing. And, when I was in conflict with the church, I would figure out, how was I supposed to love that? And if I was feeling like I was abandoning some other thing from my past or outside of the church and really in conflict because I wanted to love it, how did I hold on to loving it without offending something and trying to understand that? So all that kind of just, I was fortunate that I had the time and the space to do it and a medium with which to be able to do it, that I could kind of be rebellious without being caught. Like there's a
underground rebellion.
Yeah. I mean, even though it's really vocal and in music and all that kind of stuff, there's this subtext in this spirit of that contest. I think that you can not get away, but you can put it out there in a way that allows people to hear it. That's not necessarily confrontational, but you kind of feel it and you feel that conflict and those kinds of cognitive dissonance where I think sometimes, particularly, in the last 20 years, we've all gotten a lot more polarized in the way that we think of things or communicate about things. And it doesn't, as you mature, I think even, it doesn't always really work that way. You have to kind of figure out how you take the good with the bad, how you kind of sort those things out, even though they're not perfect, even though they're flawed. And for me, at the end of the day, that's one of the most glorious things about the gospel is that you're going to see the flaws in this stuff. You're going to see the flaws in yourself. You're going to see the flaws in others. But this is all redeemable if you take the time to find what's redeemable about it. And that to me is one of like the just massively wonderful journeys that's opened up just by saying yes to this gospel, even though I didn't understand it at the time.
Yeah. And it's faith is one of those things too, where it's always, I mean, my hope for my faith is that it's always evolving and expanding and like there's always a growing edge to it that I'm never like, oh, now I understand God. Like, it sounds ridiculous to even say that, right? Like, but it's always this kind of like, how is it manifesting in my life now and in those I love? And, it's just it's always growing. It's always changing.
Yeah, and I think definitely early on in my discipleship, I use that word with purpose because I really wanted to become a student. Like I thought I was, 10 years, 15 years behind most of my peers who'd grown up reading the Bible, grown up with this culture. I was on the fast track to try and catch up with just, people my age and people in my group and to be able to communicate with those guys. And so in that discipleship, it's really interesting. We try to be educated about our faith, that it's really easy to think that you are learning stuff, but there's a real big difference in that learning and knowing, and I think kind of early on, I thought I understood, and I thought, I don't want to say this like the people around me were trying to encourage me to be this way, but religion is its thing. The thing about religion is it gives us the boundaries of understanding what we're doing, but it's pretty finite. It kind of makes some rules, but like as a musician, I would say in music theory, there are some rules that we talk about, the way that you write music and, chord structures. But that, so where you find those moments of clarity so that everyone can share with confidence. But you also know that they're there so you can break those rules.
Totally.
And not breaking them because you don't respect them, but being able to go off the center a second so you see where those areas of interest are, where you get someone's interest because you've pushed over to the side a little bit, so you don't forget the things that are out on the margins. And that's the challenge of that. And I think in that discipline, while I understood and I got to be very educated about the day in and day out and the expectations of my faith, that also when you learn that, you get to be able to kind of, I think one of the gifts of like when you learn something, right, you know how to do it. You like even in muscle memory, like I play guitar, right? I'm not thinking of the chords that I'm playing all the time. My body takes over because I've taken the time to learn those things, but then I let go of that. And then I just let my hands move. And then I start looking up and I start listening and I start paying attention to the world. That's one of the challenges I think that we have as we spiritually grow, to not just think about our faith and our religion as this finite thing that we're supposed to be accomplishing. Those things that we know and that kind of head knowledge are really good. But I think the challenge for me in my life has been to not feel like I have to abandon those, but to kind of let loose and open myself up to knowing, and not in the sense of ownership, but it's more like seeing, like the pairing of what we say when we see something and that we know something. It's internal. It's a spiritual kind of, even ownership's the wrong word. Embeddedness, I think, is maybe one that I would choose. Know that it lives in you and that it's not going anywhere. It becomes part of your DNA. And that's the real challenge that you have to invest in. You have to, I'll leave it at that. But
no, that's really helpful. I mean, I think it was Alexander McQueen who said something about knowing the rules so he can break them, like in fashion. And it's like, I think that that's really true in religion. Like there is a head knowledge that is helpful to have, like, how do we, but then it has to move to our heart at some point. Like they rely on each other, like they continue to push each other, like our head and our heart knowledge.
Yeah. If I don't know where I'm going, sometimes I go back to the basics. It's a really good thing to have. And, so I don't want to disparage that in any way at all. And, nor do I want to glorify rebellion. I think the best to me, like in the long run, let me just put this out there. In the long run, I'm pretty conservative. Like I'm not a huge risk taker. I'm not somebody who wants to go out in the streets and, rattle bells and upset people. I'm a peacekeeper in my nature, right? No matter how much I try to change it, that's just my default position. All that being said is that, when I'm upset and unsettled, I kind of go, okay, you need to just go one step at a time. Go back to, some fundamentals of what you want to do. And by fundamental, I don't necessarily mean like strict beliefs, but, one step at a time. What am I trying to accomplish here in my faith? What am I trying to see God? Okay, I see God. I'm here and I'm turning toward God. Is it, like 20 steps out is I want to be a monastic with a 20-step routine of what I do in any given day. You know, that takes a long time to build up to. And that's not really, you miss the point of why you're kind of going to this thing. So I think that's sometimes a challenge that we have in our religious experiences where I think collectively sometimes we can get the impression that religion, being a good person in your faith, means being good at your religion. And the irony of that is that being good at your faith is being committed to your faith and being willing, actually, strangely enough, to buck the religion at times. It's just a really weird concept trying to get your head around.
Well, and I always think like to participate in your faith means to wrestle and question and like look at it from different angles, as opposed to just like swallowing the pill and seeing it in black and white and giving all the power to the authority at the pulpit. It really is like this wrestle participation that isn't always, I don't know the right, it isn't always just perfectly peaceful, you know?
Yeah, I think one of the metaphors that I think about actually is like if you think about a multiplication table and the argument of like when we know things by rote, right? So there are some folks who can like actually look at a multiplication table and say 4 times 4 is 16, right? Because they know that 4 times 4 is 16. But you put 4 lots of 4 on the table and they actually can't count the 16 on the table. Like that's when you like knowing that 4 times 4 is 16. That's knowing. You can repeat that 4 times 4 is 16 all day long because you know the table, you memorize that table. But to actually know how that works, to be able to look at something instantly, that's a level of mastery that is the part that we tend to want to skip over. Like, hey, look, I got all A's because I could fill out the multiplication table. But it's amazing how many people can fill out the multiplication table that don't actually know why that table is there.
Yeah, that's good. And when you're saying, you know, you didn't think that you were rebellious. I don't know if I would say that. Maybe it felt a little rebellious as a teenager listening because when you were like in the late 90s and early 2000s, you know, your music was so honest and you were in this like cohort of other musicians that were very, Jesus is my best friend.
Right.
And I loved all of it. Like I really soaked all of that in, but like your music was very distinct in that it just had this level of honesty, which I think you were talking about earlier. It's like this undergirding of like, maybe I have some questions or maybe there's like some room to wrestle. That was just different than everybody else.
Yeah, but I think some of it, if I'm honest, was smoke and mirrors, because the truth of it was never in a million years did I ever get comfortable being on a microphone and saying, I love Jesus.
Yeah.
God, like I don't even want to say it in like, it just wasn't natural to me. And yet there are 2 things to that. One is like, I'm like, what is wrong with me that I don't want to do that? Is this what I'm supposed to want to do? Like I felt bad because that's what everybody around me did. And that's what everybody expected. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. It's not that I don't want to do it. I feel weird and unnatural when I do that. At the same time, like, what did I do with the fact that I genuinely wanted to be in this conversation with those people? Like this is my community of which I wanted, you know, these are the people who are talking about the faith that I want to be involved with. And so some of the ways that I learned how to manage that was how do I write if you look through the body of my work, I very rarely say Jesus.
Yeah.
I very rarely put it in my thing, but yet my 3rd record, it's called The Way I Am. That 3rd record for me was a study, for me, in looking at Jesus. And I was really struggling at that time theologically to kind of see Jesus anything other than a human being. Like I needed to just see Jesus. I needed to have the religious possibility that Jesus was just a dude, like not God incarnate. Like I couldn't, it wasn't a contest of it. I just couldn't comprehend it. So I had to start at this very carnal human being experience. And what would that mean for a human being to do that? That entire record, every word that I wrote on it, everything that I thought about was it was utterly about the Christ, this human being or this thing called Jesus. And yet I don't think I said Jesus on that whole record, but maybe 1 or 2 times if I said it at all. Like I'd have to go back and look. Yeah. And I know that I wouldn't have said, oh, Jesus, come and comfort me. I just wouldn't do it. And so the result of that completely an accident on my part. Like, this is what my fascination with what art does is it gives us a way it actually finds us out. Like, it gives me, like, one of the things we say in creativity is the medium, like the things that we're working with, the medium often shapes the outcome of what you envision was going to happen. So sometimes the medium doesn't work the way that you expected, even though you're trying to sculpt this thing, right? You're chipping on granite and a piece of granite falls off that you were going to use for a nose.
Yeah.
Now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of keep working around that. And I think the result of that in my art was it allowed me to, I think in some sense, it gave me a vehicle and permission to be able to still continue to dive deeper into my faith, to be able to extend the language rather than narrow the language down. And I think, not long after that record, I just stopped writing Christian music whatsoever because it became such a challenge for me to feel like I had to keep narrowing my language down when what I really wanted to do was expand it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think what you did do in those first 3 albums was give people permission to be Christian in a different way. Like when I was becoming a pastor, like the senior pastor at the time, he preached in this particular way that I never could do. Like I just never could be that preacher. And once I realized I didn't have to be, like I could be my own preacher and do it in my own way, I was like, oh, there's the gift. And there's the, like, I had to give myself permission to be Christian and pastor and whatever in the way that I was created to be. And I think that your music, because it had that edge to it, that slightly different way, gave people permission to talk about Jesus in a new way without saying Jesus, right? Like there's other ways to describe Christ.
What I love what you're talking about, like the challenge, like it's a human challenge, right? For us to figure out our own sense of self. And it's an interesting environment, I think, in particular inside of faith communities. Sometimes there's this weird phenomenon, I think, that tempts us into thinking that homogeny is the church. Like if you listen to what we say from afar and you listen to some of the conversations and some of the theologies, you might get the impression that what's required of you as an individual is to truly transform yourself into something that looks like everybody else. Good little soldiers right next to each other, all dressed the same, like each with their little role. Like there's this space that you're supposed to fit into. And that's really counterintuitive to like what you're talking about. Something as simple as going, I don't preach like that. Or like I'm a guitar player, I don't play guitar like Eric Clapton. Am I supposed to? Am I doing something wrong if I don't? Am I good in the sense of like, am I doing something meaningful and fulfilling if I don't do it the way that somebody else does it? Yeah. And we in that environment, it can sometimes be tricking us to say that when you say something like, I need to find my own voice, I need to find my own gift. In that environment, and I even got pushed, I felt the pressure of this being pushed back in those environments. Like, you're being selfish. We don't need you to be you. That's a selfish thing that you would say to have confidence in yourself, fullness in yourself, that you're supposed to shape yourself into something external rather than to finding out how you can polish and master what you have been given. And starting there. And I've always really struggled with that in that environment. And yet at the same time, like you struggle against that, but there's this voice that says, no, you are you. You are you, and you are beautiful. And the way that you do it, the way that you pastor is going to be unique. Thank God. So unique than anybody else is going to be able to do it. Only you can pastor the way that you can pastor, and only I will be able to sing the way that I sing. And when we start looking up and comparing them to other people, we go, oh my God, I'm so not like that. It's neither a crime for the person who's not like you, and it's not a crime that you're not like that. And it's actually a joy and a wonder if you can figure out something of that with a degree of confidence and joy and celebration to invite other people into that and do that for themselves as well. It's not an autonomous journey. Like what you find out, and Henry Now, I talk about this a lot with Henry Now, and that inner work that you do with yourself, it may in the larger context of what we've gone through in recent years of Christianity sound like a self-indulgent journey. But when you do that in that sacred space, the next step is to go outside of that. You have to concentrically expand your circle. And whatever you learned in that sacred space and by yourself then has to be tested in the new world. In like in the expanded world, in your as your social thing grows. And as you learn that, what you find is you are just the beginning seed of something greater. And if you didn't do your preparatory work, if you don't know who you are, you don't know what your gifts are, the next time you go to that next level, it just blows you apart and you just kind of keep doing that space. So that's the challenge, I think, the blessing of that, being able to do that work and then come back out.
When you're talking about the inner, like I always am like that, the outer work is a reflection of our inner work. So we need to be doing the inner work and like the time with God, the knowing ourselves, all that kind of stuff, like where are our growing edges, all that to like real. And then what you're saying is that then we test it in the outside world and we come back in and then we go back out. And it's kind of this ongoing process of that.
Well, there's the whole fake it till you make it thing, right? And unfortunately, and this is particularly true of like the more conservative our faith environments tend to be, is that, you know, the fake it till you make it pressure starts amping up when you want to get along, you want to be able to be in that space, you know, where what you're experimenting on the outside isn't really understood. Like, hey, you know, they're growing, like it's a space, like how can I help you on this journey? And that's a little bit of the, I think, you know, my naivety when I first started doing faith music. I started writing thinking, oh, like we're all sharing this. This is an ongoing dialogue and conversation. And as that went, you know, as like the expectations of what I would be representative of, what I was supposedly supposed to be as a leader, somehow manifested into this idea that I was supposed to know these things and exemplify these things rather than being on a journey, like wherever I was in my journey, being honest about where that was and sharing with that and carrying on that flame of that kind of conversation. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is, and the unfortunate part of that fake it till we make it thing is we start like putting on all the clothing of everything that we're supposed to look like on the outside while we're actually on the inside really struggling to even wonder if we're being honest about what clothes we put on.
Yeah, I was watching this this thing on Netflix yesterday called How to Be a Tyrant. And
I saw that.
And I just have this fascination with Hitler, and I don't mean to compare the church to Hitler, but they have this like everybody has to be the same. No one can step out of line, and they want uniformity and they try to call it unity. And sometimes I think that is really true of the church. Like we call it unity as a way to maybe control what other people are doing and not allow the freedom of like, what does it look like for you to be a Christian in the world that looks completely different than how I would be a Christian in the world, and like somehow be able to hold those two things as okay. No,
I love that. I'm going to keep that in my memory, like that uniformity is not the same thing as unity. And one of the pitfalls that we're seeing about that, right, is a lot of us, there's this kind of awakening going on right now, like, right, a lot of people experiencing deconstruction, a lot of social justice, which has made us realize that this unity is actually uniformity that's marginalized so many people outside of that space. And what used to be kind of a big circle just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. The good news is about that is that there's more of us getting, you know, more and more marginalized in a weird, like the irony is, right, as that capsule gets a lot smaller, where although that it's painful when that happens, what we realize is there's actually this bigger community growing. So it's strange in that sense. But when we look at that really and truly see the cost of trying to be, we're not unified at all. Like when you've got people on the margins and you don't know who you've never been there. You've never been to the edges of your property. You've never been with that. What you start seeing are those people on that journey, now all of a sudden being rebellious, being marginalized, being outside of that because they're outside of the unification, and that's actually disrupted your unity. And in order to keep that unity, you have to somehow be able to expand those margins, which means that, you know, if you're expanding that, you're going to be more diverse. You're going to have a lot of experiences that look different. You're going to, you know, Christianity itself is a great example. There are over 35,000 different denominations and growing, you know, from mainline Protestants to Catholicism to like things that are, you know, little churches right next to each other that are really just separated by one idea.
Yeah.
Like, is that one idea the thing that makes one not a Christian or are not on a journey or another. Like if we continue to do that and we don't see that there are just a plethora of angles with which we can approach our faith, or plethora of angles and experiences and things that we should be bringing to this conversation, that gets more and more diverse. And that unity, I'm not utopian in that sense. I don't know if that's accomplishable in a lifetime. I realize that's a theological aim, right? The kingdom on heaven as it is or on earth as it is in heaven. I don't want to contest that necessarily, but it's certainly not that uniformity is only going to get more and more small. It gets more, by its nature, it gets more and more elite. It gets more and more constricted to only so many people to being able to do that. And the last metaphor that I think about oftentimes often happens around sex. That's a nice big one. Like this idea that we're all going to be monastics somehow, celibate monastics for our whole life, as if that's some ultimate gain. And no, not everybody chooses that. You have to have a degree of desire to be able to have and enforce that kind of discipline on yourself, and to have that not be a crucible of punishment or shame, but rather to take that on as a challenge that you genuinely want to do because it's life fulfilling and giving to you. But so few of us are monastics in that sense.
Absolutely.
Most of us don't want to be. I couldn't find joy in that if you paid me.
Yeah.
But where is it that I find joy, and where am I free to find that in those disciplines? And that's an approach that I'll have that's unique, one that you will have that's unique. It's going to be unique for all of us. And that's the challenge in that unity, to just be able to share that and come together, horizontally rather than vertically in the way that we approach even our neighbor.
Yeah. That's a big goal of Dana and I's in this podcast season, is what God looks like, and to interview all these people that are doing ministry in the world in different ways, all from different backgrounds. And, it's what we're trying to do is really say, you can be Christian however you are Christian. Like, you can be Christian however you're Christian. And that's
it's really a hard thing. I don't know how long it took you to be able to say that out loud. It's really hard, and I'm pretty sure this is on your list of questions. But people ask me a lot, like, "Are you a Christian?" or "How would you describe that?" And I like, for myself, even, like, that's been a hard thing to answer. And I'm okay to hold that open handed. Like, I have no desire to be a Christian in a strange, like, one part of me, like, I don't want to be a Christian. Don't accuse me of being a Christian. On the other hand, I'm like, I don't want to let that go. Like, we misunderstand that, I think, to a degree of what that means. But like, this is the language of my faith. This is, I was born in Kansas. Everyone around me is Protestant or Catholic, like the language. I wasn't born in the Middle East. I have no context of God through a Muslim lens. My context is entirely through a Western Christian lens. So that's the language that I was given to, and the one that I'm fluent in. Yet and second to that, I participate in evangelical Christianity, and I understand that religion very well. But I also know, as I've grown in that theologically, there are things that people would say to me, "You do not qualify in my book to be a Christian because you have that theological position," which is so bizarre to me, that because even though somebody could say it, or like take my LGBTQ, my affirmation of my own self as a gay person, and for the LGBTQ community, or even like marriage issues, things like gender and all that kind of stuff that gets lumped in there, where people go, "You can't be a Christian and be gay." And I think that's such a pedestrian question. Of course you can. Like, it's happening everywhere around. Right. Like, you can't have sex outside of marriage. It happens all the time.
Right.
You can't be a Christian. And like, it's not like it's not an endorsement of a morality. It's, people exist, and what their spiritual journeys are and where they are happy, and it happens in a variety of different ways. And I can't, in good faith, tell someone you can't move forward on your journey until you operate only in this faction. It's just so difficult. And so, I don't know, on one hand, like, as a person of faith, which is the easiest thing for me to say, I realize in the truest religious theological sense, there are sometimes, in some people's eyes, things that disqualify me from being on that panel or on that board because I'm not going to vote for those things. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I'm not in the community. And that doesn't mean that I'm not fluent in the language. And that doesn't mean that I'm not still there to be influential or communed with. It doesn't mean that I should be ousted because I've got this thing that's different, and I'm not wanting to disconnect myself from those other people who theologically different from me either. So it's a real nifty thing that when you're starting to talk about that as an identity, what does it really mean? And it starts blurring those margins of what it does mean when we say, I am a Christian. I don't know that I believe, I don't even know the language. I don't know if I believe in that sentence anymore. But it doesn't mean that I don't believe in that sentence for anyone. It doesn't mean that doesn't have value. It just means that for me, I understand that this is a language of which I have and that I participate in, and it's very Christocentric. At the same time, I just am what I am. Like Peter Gomes said, I am what I am, and I've got what I've got, and I'm here, and I'm turning toward this direction, toward God. This is the direction that I'm turned toward. I don't know what else happens after that, or whatever you want to call me, or what anybody wants to call me. We're doing our best to turn in that direction, and I think that's really far more important.
Yeah. Well, and I do think Christian comes with so many complications or something. Like we were just at Pride a couple of days ago, and I have this shirt that says, "This pastor loves you," and pastors in rainbow. And I'm like, I want to make it such a point that I'm not that kind of pastor, or I'm not that kind of Christian, right? Like I need to like knock people on the heads with that information, because Christian is like this. People have such different views of what Christianity is. I know what it means for me, and yet I also get defensive when I tell other people that I'm a pastor or a Christian. I'm like, but I need you to know what kind, because the language is just kind of complicated.
Yeah, but part of it, I mean, a lot of the language that we use is symbolic, right?
Yeah.
Or like you're talking about your T-shirt. It quickly and easily opens the door to what kind of conversation you aim to have and your purposes of why you're there. But if I really want to get to know you and what does it mean? Why do you say that? What does it mean for you to be a pastor? Like, we're so trained to just take the label and a variety of things.
Yeah.
Our entire world, not just our faith communities, but our entire lives around us, social media, everything's bombarding us with identifying ourselves so people will see us as who we are. But that's so problematic if I just take you at what bullet points you give me about who you are, because there's a lifetime of understanding who you are and what stories go into each one of those bullet points.
Yeah.
I'm gay. Well, I don't know. Okay, great, fine. Like, that would freak people out if, or I need to be bi. I need to be one of the initials in the thing. Like, I don't know. And I don't care. I don't stand by that. I don't get up every day and think, oh my God, I am a woman. I just don't think about that. And some days I don't get up and go, oh my God, I am a Christian. If you really want to know what I mean about my faith, it's a long-term conversation. It's an investment in time. It's sitting around the barbecue and drinking a beer with one another and not trying to give me the paragraph that lets me understand you best, Chelsea, so I can sum you up and judge you based on what you just said. Instead of building a relationship with you long-term, investing and traveling with you. At the end of the day, that's what our social constructs are. Like, we're building relationships, and these are long-term. And, if there's anything in terms of understanding what that means as church, seen as a living organism rather than a collective warehouse of human beings. It's a living, growing thing.
That's so good. And I think that's so true. We want to be able to know what box to check so we know how to perceive you. And I think ultimately it's to know how we can judge you, or like what we can judge against ourselves or something like that. Like, if I know where you are, then I know how I maybe need to be, or how I can, move forward with what box to put you in.
They're useful places to start. It's not a crime. I mean, one of the things I do, I travel so much, and I find it interesting. Usually when I meet new people, I'm like, hey, where are you from? Like, where you grew up, what part of the world you grew up in, what part of the states you grew up in. Give me a little bit of your background. And I realized that this habit that I have, which is kind of me getting the framework so I can feel like I can stand in front of you and get to know you as a stranger, that I realized like, oh, I'm setting the basis for how I'm judging people. Like that's totally what it was. And I'm like, oh, you're from the Midwest. Okay, I've got a baseline for what I think that you're going to be. But the cool part is I was hopeful that you would disrupt that. Like, okay, I just needed something to contextualize and give me a framework for what kind of human beings may be standing in front of me, but to not hold them to that. So it's fun and it's helpful for me to say, yeah, I'm a Christian. All right. Oh my God. Like, I can't tell you how many cabbies have found out that I'm a Christian and then just go off their nut and didn't at all listen to me. It wasn't about me at that point, right? So like, when you get to find out this information and somebody gives you a title like that, that is a doorway for you to make a decision whether or not you're just going to, slap that on them as a label and set that as, monolithic to whatever your idea about that is, or it's an invitation you to figure out what does that mean to you. Right. And why did you tell me that those were your pronouns? Why did you tell me that that was your faith tradition? Why did you describe yourself as a pastor instead of a mom at this moment? Or, all of those things. So those are keys that we're supposed to be as the outsider listening to. Those are invitations to us, not identifiers of that person. So you can judge them and treat them in the way that you imagine that they should be treated.
Yeah. And it takes intentionality to hold those things with open hands, like this is a starting place, but like exactly what you're saying, like, why did you want to share that with me? What was that? What's important to you about that identity or whatever?
And as you find out, you meet somebody, right? You meet one pastor one day and you meet another pastor the next day. You're like, wow, those are two wildly different people. And you start to realize, oh yeah, being in church leadership, some people are administrative church leaders. Some people are truly pastoral. Like caregivers, like some people are in the criminal justice system with hard-nosed, hard-knocked people. Other people are, touchy-feely, therapeutic, all rainbows and kittens kinds of pastors. I mean, we need all of those folks. And in order to understand who's before you, like, we need to have the space of those unique people, and we need to be prepared to be able to see them, not just expecting them to be one thing. It's, not only that's on us as individuals, right, to find our own selves and have confidence in that. And it's also the role of a community and give us that invitation to be that. And I think that's what a lot of people, for me, I think that's what a lot of people are challenged with right now is the permission that we're starting to see of this concept and this idea that you being you is a glorious and beautiful thing, not you being just, like the in the argument of like the evangelical model, which was you're a piece of crap, which now needs to be worked to be redeemed. Like it's starting at zero and like a negative bad space and kind of going out. It's really theologically actually flipping that around. And it challenges the theologies that we have, right? Specifically of say atonement theology, right? Which is really hard for me to talk about in public because I realize what I'm saying. I'm realizing that I'm saying I don't need to be rescued by some supernatural thing. What I need is to understand that God loves me as I started and then to build up from there. Like it's a different perception of that. And that's so challenging because what it sounds like is I don't appreciate the cross and that Jesus didn't do anything in that sacrifice. I'm like, no, Jesus still did something amazing in that. Like I am worth energy and effort. I am worth love. I am worth communicating to the ends of the earth to go Jen, go Chelsea, go you. You are not rubbish. Come.
Yeah, but it's a total flip to original sin versus original goodness. And maybe it's not even verse, but like we forget about our original goodness and when God created us, called it very good. And
right.
Like, that's the starting place.
Still biblical. It's a good thing. I started out and and that's like, well, how did it go good? Because we must have made it bad. Right. And this is the thing that I think about oftentimes especially when we talk about diversity, is these issues have been pushed more and more as you've seen, like women coming through divinity school, LGBTQ people coming through div school, like not just white European males being the having the microphone of what we imagine our faith is teaching us about God and about ourselves. And that's shifted as we've had more and more female voices, more and more queer voices in particular, more and more voices of color, more and more colonized voices of, European empire. What we're seeing is like, stop telling us we're bad, and as we've seen that, we've contested a theology that's never been contested by those who've been marginalized by it. And it's not destructive to the greater initiative. It's not it's a challenge of the theology. It's not a challenge of God. It's not God, I don't need you. It's like, wow, God loves me. Like that's a profoundly more enthusiasm. Like I have way more enthusiasm to figure out that all the crap that I've been through in my life, that God goes, are you done? Like, all right, dust yourself off, kid. Or like, when you're ready, like, don't be ashamed. Come over here.
Yeah.
Not like, you can't come over here until you clean yourself up, kid. That's not the conversation. That's the challenge, I think, as a result of our diversity opening up to a lot of other voices, a lot of other experiences, a lot of other lands, a lot of other geopolitical issues. We get to see how that one idea of just, you need to basically work yourself up to a space of worthiness. And so many of us are more collectively saying, no, my worthiness needs to be reaffirmed to me and reaffirmed to my community, reaffirmed to my God. And that is our work, to actually believe that we're capable of it is good. Like, we are born into the it is good. When are we going to believe it? And to me, that's real that's actually really the liberation. The moment that you say it is good, like, I am good.
Yeah.
Like that gives me chills. I've been doing 20 some odd years. And every time I say that out loud to myself, even, I am good. Like, holy shit. It seems so scary too, to say that, right?
Well, and it changes the way you participate in the world when you're coming from a place of I am good versus I am bad. Like, it changes how you are as a person in the world, how you treat other people, that not only are you good, but like, the person you meet on the street is good, and the person that views differently than you is good. And it's all God created in God's image. And that shifts the perspective of life. I mean,
yeah, imagine those moments. And like, I'm not a really touchy-feely human being at all, but I remember like a few moments in my life where I took the hand of a stranger, and just in my head, I went, "You're good. Like, you are good." And just what. That's an internal thing, that's you're right. Like, it changes the way that we see the world around us too. Like, I don't want to like name any. Oftentimes I search to name things. Like, some guy I was talking to a while back, we were talking about, kind of the lower rungs on the socioeconomic ladder as human beings. And I'm like, why are we like lowering these people so we can prove that loving somebody at this thing is like a low thing? And I'm like, stop looking at it as low. Like, stop looking at somebody who's socioeconomically like lower than you in the space. Stop looking at it in that hierarchy. Look at it as another human being. Hold that person's hands and say, you are good. Like, you're not good. I'm not saying you're good because you need to be reaffirmed that because you have less money than me. I'm saying that you are good. I don't care about the money. The money isn't a qualifier here. You are good. I take the part, take merit, stand before your spouse and hold their hand and go, you are good. Like, I love what is in you. Like, in the middle, while they're knee deep in diapers and totally, took the guts out of the car, trying to be on the cheap and not taking it to the car mechanic. I've done that before. Like, in the middle of all that screw up, or in the best day, like, turn to that person and go, you are good. Like, and know it. And that changes you. It changes the other person. It's, I am good. I am good. I've said that in the midst of attack, right? When people are attacking you and going, you don't know what you're doing. You're a piece of crap. You need to change. And I just kind of like center myself and go, no, I am good. Yeah. Like, I am not going to disappear because of this. Even if I've done something I wish I could change.
Yeah.
Like, that to me is one of the challenges of our liberation, to understand that we have agency within those spaces, to be able to claim that. And it's not irreverent. It's a holy act to be able to look at what God has created and said was good, and we say we see it too. I see what you did, and it is good.
That is so, and I think that church at its best is that, like, because we do that in community on those days where we can't say, I am good. We have community to say, you are good, that church at its best is the reminder of the original goodness in ourselves and in each other. And the church from that place participates in the world. I mean, just the shift of that, as opposed to making other people feel shamed, to making other people feel good.
When you say that original goodness, is that like a phrase that's becoming, is that yours, or is that like a new phrase that's becoming like a theological shift?
It's Richard Rohr, who everything good comes from Richard Rohr, if you've ever read it. I'm like a Rohrian. I don't know what that, but he wrote it in a meditation like a long time ago, and it like was tattooed on my heart. Like, it was just like, that's the thing.
Original goodness. I'm gonna if it's not a trend, let's make it one.
Right.
It's such a weird, I think, when I talk about like the conflict that I've had between like a secular world and the religious world, right? And so I live and play in bars all the time, and then I go to churches and say, drop the F-bomb. So I get in trouble in everywhere I go. But I think one of the first pushbacks for people who don't understand, like, say, the context, so like, you're a Christian, like, and what they think I mean by that, one of the things most people complain about is that concept, right? Why would I want to be a Christian? You guys are telling me I'm a sinner and I'm going to hell. Like, it'd be original sin is such, it's been with us for thousands of years. And we've been pushing that. No human being likes to be told when you first meet them, the first thing out of your mouth is, you're a hot mess and you can't come along here. Like, you're no good.
Right.
And nobody responds well to that. Like, hi, I can't imagine like meeting my future partner and saying, you need to work I like what you could become.
Yeah. If only you were saved.
If only, that's, I think a lot. I think one of my arguments to any theology is like, you should listen to what people say to you in the shadow of what you've just said. Like, original sin, like, immediately, it's not that we just don't like it. It's that we've seen the effects of it. It does start from a negative space, but more than that, more than just the social response to somebody saying, you're living in sin and God can't like you. It's seeing how destructive that is. It's marginalized folks. It's torn down people's lives. It's upset well-meaning, lifelong Christians who at that moment did something they can't take back and see that as a sin in some way that separates them from God, rather than seeing them as different from God. Yeah. And there's a distinction in that. And that's, to me, like the points where grace comes in and say, like our greatest, I think that's what we talk about when we're like separated from God, as a concept we don't, it's not a very modern thing to talk about, but our separation from God isn't, I would argue, is not necessarily a conception of our sin, but a realization of our ego that we're not God's.
Yeah.
Right. And that anxiety that we have, that no matter all the work that I put into it, I'll still never be able to be in ultimate control. I'll never be able to ultimately create. I mean, I can do a lot of things, and it's real, but there's just that limiter on there that's such a hit to our egos, so catastrophic to our sense of security, because we're not God. And yet that separation, that's the chasm, I think, that for me is one of the anxieties that we don't talk about in our faith very much. Is it's not, because everything that we do as what we do because we're human. Mm-hmm. The consequences of that are consequences that only we get to live as humans. We don't get to sidestep I don't get to live eternally. If I smoked heavily for 40 years, I'm not surprised that I did myself into cancer. Yeah. Like these things that we do have consequences for, we can't sidestep those. That's unfortunately where we are. But where grace steps in is like, it is not a crime for you to not be God. It is not any less an amazing, wonderful thing that you and all of your humanity are glorious on this earth.
Yeah.
It is, it's a weird kind of thing to kind of get our heads around, but we go back into those really simple things and go, oh yeah, you're not good. And that's why you need God to bridge the gap, because God will pave that over with the blood of Jesus Christ and you'll be fine. And it's just like, I need a little bit more than that.
Yeah. And that's really the message. Like when I was growing up in the youth group in the 90s and stuff, that really was the message. And sometimes I am so surprised that I stuck around, because that's a hard thing to stick around with. And it breaks my heart for people that are still in that place, that are like, I'm bad, I'm shameful, I need this other thing outside of myself to save, it makes me sad sometimes, because I'm like, I think it's so much bigger and more expansive than that, and more sacred.
There are a lot of people who do give up, I mean,
Yeah.
in that, I think the thing that's kept me going kind of underneath of all of that is like this still small voice of hope that says, the cognitive dissonances that we have, or these paradoxes that we have, like, I don't even have words for sometimes the inner peace of knowing that whatever this is, even though I don't know what it is, and everything that I've said today, like I'll stand by it 100%, and I'll go, I don't know, I might listen to that like 5 minutes from now and go, why did I say that? Like, but underneath of that is just this hope that whatever God is, I'm not going to change. I don't have to believe in God. Like, the moment that I made that realization, like, that radically changed my faith life. I didn't have to work every day to keep saying that I believe in God. Like, some days I really don't. Like, I don't believe in God today, and I can't see it, and I'm all muddled up or whatever. Just to have the permission of that, and to not feel like, I don't know, a bolt of lightning is going to come down and hit me on the head because I'm an idiot. Like, or not, you don't have to be like, it's not an idiotic thing to think. Like, I don't want to disparage that anybody that's there, because I'm there like more often than not. But does that make me a good Christian or a bad Christian? Like, what kind of Christian says they don't believe in God today? Like, this one,
the honest one. I think the honest one, right?
Yeah, and pastor, like the shock and horror to me when I was probably a teenager, and I'd talk to a few adult pastors, right? And pastors going, I don't know if I believe that's what the Bible says that, but I don't know if I'm into that, and I don't know if I believe in God, and I'm not going to be. I don't know. I was like, what?
Loud. Yeah,
we're all like that, and I think that's the thing is, like, once you have permission to go, yeah, I'm not going to wear makeup today, like, just. And I'm going to be me, and I'm going to, I think those things are permissible. And God knows that anyway. Like, and the hope of that is that's one of the things I said to my friends. This was like maybe 15 years ago, but it was kind of it was the day I was like kind of okay with where I was spiritually. Like, I'd really freaked out of whether I was or I wasn't a Christian anymore, right? Because the truth of it was, I didn't want to be in church. The last thing I did is want to go to church anymore. I didn't want to pray. I didn't want to like think about Jesus or study or be a disciple of anything. I just wanted to live my life.
Yeah.
And yet I didn't stop having theological conversations with people. Like, I didn't stop. It was weird. Inside my head, that voice never left. Not crazy voices, but like that still small voice thing. Yeah. And I just remember thinking one day, it was like if God was anthropomorphic, I just kind of said, you know what? I am me. And dude, if you can't get over that, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't know what to tell you. So I'm going to go live my life, and I'm going to go do my thing. And if you want to follow me, fine.
You can come along.
Right. And that was the way that I did it. I'm not necessarily saying, I don't know, good or bad or otherwise. But not long after that, I said to another kind of fellow Christian friend, I said, you know what? I said, I think I know what it means to fear God. And that was a moment where I was just like, I was so afraid of speaking the truth about where I was. And I think it was the first time in a long time I'd actually spoken the truth to God. And I said, that's the strange thing about this. I was like, I think I know what it means to fear God. I'm not afraid of God's power. I'm afraid that God won't love me. I'm afraid that, like, I've been afraid that God would love me. And I realized, I was like, if God wants to be that God of fear, that's up to God. That's not up to me. But the little bit of me was just like, had a little candle of hope somewhere in a dark tunnel somewhere that said, maybe God's not like that. And so when I put it out there for God to be that God, God wasn't that God.
Yeah.
You know, even though I expected God to go, wow, you're lost, Jen, you're lost. And like, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like, and it was that moment. Like, that moment of fearing God was not God and God's ultimate power and lightning bolts. It was the fear that I think all of us have is like, when I tell you the truth of me, when I tell you where I'm really at today, that's my fear, is that you won't love me and that you will abandon me.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to me, where God says, this is not the God we're supposed to fear. This is not the thing that you have to fear anymore. That's a liberation that you have. And I think we even see that in our biblical text, right? That we're supposed to fear God in that way. I think there's part of it in our faith tradition that shines us on to that says we should be afraid because God can leave you. The Old Testament's full of it. God can leave you. God can abandon you. He
Right.
he is a, no, I don't think that, but we get these ideas, our Bible has told us has all of the things that we've thought, all of our insecurities, not all of them, but many of our insecurities and the things that we thought historically about God. And that moment for me was just like, wow, I am waiting for the shoe to fall for God to be this God, and God wasn't that God. And I didn't, it wasn't me waiting or hoping and expecting that. I was just like, I give up. I stopped trying to make God be, because God's going to be whatever God is, or God's not. I don't know. I didn't know what was going to come next. And that was such a fearful moment on the edge of that. And I just waited. And that was a cool thing to know that I guess maybe in the context of Christianity, this idea that I always told that God was this capacity to smite, and that I waited for that. I set myself up for it. Basically go, you can smite me now because you're right. I am this way. And God went, all right, now that you finally said yes to you being you.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Yeah.
Except for I was here for you. Like, like those weird moments where somebody just kind of puts you on the hot seat.
Yeah.
And goes, would you just say what you mean?
Yeah.
You say where you're really at, and you feel like that person is like forcing you or backing you in a corner. What they're actually offering you is liberation.
Yeah.
They're actually offering you a way out. Like, dude, okay, fine. Thank you, Chelsea, for finally saying that, because I knew that's what you wanted all along.
Right.
You were annoyed before, and now I know what you need.
And for God to be like, okay, I'm glad you realize what I've already known. And
boom.
And so great. Now I've accepted, but now you do. So now we can move on from here in an honest way.
Yeah. Now we'll work together. And I think, that takes, it's a really terrifying moment to be able to go through. I don't mean to make it sound any easier than it was. Like, I don't know anything more now than I knew then, but it was just weird to be able to go, yeah, fear is the wrong context. I think that it's not the motivator. I think that people think that it is. Like, even like for my LGBTQ journey, one of the things I realized in that is like, I wasn't playing music because I was afraid of what would come next. I was afraid that if I picked up my guitars again, that people would ask me to sing. And then if people asked me to sing, then I would have to be on a stage. And then if I got on that stage, that people would have to be asking me what my sexual orientation was. That if I got on that stage, people would ask me about how I felt about my faith. I got on that stage, people would be asking me how I felt about my faith and, my sexual orientation. Like, it got so big. And so it got so big to me that I just wouldn't even pick up my guitars, because I realized one of the reasons why I wasn't doing the thing that I loved, which is just picking up my guitar and playing some songs, is because I was afraid of everything on the other side of it. And what I didn't know is that, like, that was a limitation that was just, it was in the way of something joyful. Like, the fear can sometimes like make us think, like, it's, I don't know. It it wasn't something that was, I don't know. I looked at it as a challenge. Like, you know what? I'm not going to be afraid of you. Like, I'm going to see if those things that you're making me step back and making me not do things, I'm going to see if that's really accurate. So I tested that too. I picked up my guitars and I was just like one day at a time. And all those things that I was afraid of actually happened. They really did. Like I came here. And I'm here, like people were mad at me because I was gay. I largely lived out my public, I largely lived out what I was going through in my faith on a public scale. Like, that's not cool. Like, I needed some privacy, but I was ready to move out in that. But all those things happened. And yet, the strange thing about the fear is that I could see a little bit of what was ahead of me and to be able to do it. And I don't know, it was almost an invitation in a strange sense.
The way you're talking about,
go ahead.
The way you're talking about fear, like I think so often we think the opposite of fear is love, which I think it maybe is true too, but it's almost like the opposite of fear is honesty, or like to combat fear is honesty. Like it's really laying it out there, saying like, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is, and it's vulnerable, but it's like this honesty at the other side of that. Like there's all this fear in between being honest and liberation or something.
Well, it's a little, I think of fear sometimes in the context of pain. And I don't think it's always this way. Like I wouldn't say this is a global statement, but we're often afraid of pain, right? Especially in our bodies. But what pain is, if you just look at it scientifically, pain is like a neurological signal that something needs your attention, that it's, and it's a pretty big siren that goes off in your body, right? It's a signal. This is where you need to be paying attention to. This is a thing that has your focus or wants our focus, and whether or not it needs it, that's the decision, right? Like, do you really need my attention that much? Like, and the answer may be yes, the answer may be no, but that's kind of one of the ways I've dealt with anxiety, the way I've dealt with actual physical pain or emotional pain. I kind of look at those things, instead of running away from them and trying to avoid them, going, what is happening? Like, just seriously, what is happening here? Why am I afraid? Like, what is the thing that I'm afraid of? And I mean, I will make no bones about it. I understand that I'm a deeply confrontational person and not everybody's like that. So please talk to somebody who's not as confrontational as I am, because this is my perspective on it. It's like, I tend to turn toward it. I go, what is it? What is that fear really? What am I afraid of? What is that thing signaling to me? And do I need to pay attention to it? Do I need to recover from something? Has this been hurtful or harmful to me? Is this something that I need to have a skill set for that I don't have it? And that's why I'm afraid of the ask. Maybe something's asking me to move forward, and what I realize is I'm unprepared to go forward emotionally, or a skill set or something like that. Or is it, should I not jump off this cliff because like it's a long drop and it's a foolish thing for you to do? Like, what are those seriously, to be able to evaluate that? But it's not necessarily, they're not always rational things that we're afraid of. There's sometimes moments, there's sometimes that those fears, or sometimes a pain, or sometimes a difficulty is the starting place of something where we have to do our reconnoiter, get our stuff together, start making a plan of attack for what comes next.
Yeah, you're right. I feel like there's very few people like that. Like, it's avoid pain and fear at all costs, when really it could be, what's it here to teach me? Or, undo.
Jennifer and I end up talking for quite a while longer. So in the interest of saving time, we'll wrap up this episode here. We hope to have many more conversations with Jennifer in the future. Also, we wanted to let you know that this is the final episode in our Season 2 What God Looks Like series. Thank you so much for tuning in. It was such an honor to lift up these diverse and beautiful stories. If you missed any episodes, you can check them out anytime on our podcast or YouTube channel. There's a lot of new and exciting stuff coming up with the Collective Table, including Season 3 dropping in mid-fall, a virtual book club, dinner church opportunities, and other ways to engage. So make sure to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media. Again, thank you so much for listening. We hope to connect with you soon.